and welcome again, and welcome back to our final session of Stream 2 of Digital Fundraising Summit. Before our CEO Jonathan wraps up the day, for those just joining us, I'm Lisa Schmidt. I'm the head of partnerships at Charity Digital, and I'm delighted to welcome our last speaker for today, Amy Ross from Charity Aid Foundation. She will be telling us all about how to write a fundraising bid. But before handing over to Amy, I just want to remind people who may be just joining us for that last session that there's a few house rules. Obviously, with all the other sessions, this presentation is being recorded. We'll share the slides afterwards so that you can have a look on demand and digest and share with the rest of your team. If you need any help with closed captions, they are available at the bottom right of your screen. Please ask loads of questions in the Q&A section, and it will take 5 to 10 minutes to answer them at the end, towards the end of the presentation. And then if you have any sound or image issue, just let us know in the chat section, and we will do our very best to get back live. So that's all the house rules. Now let me hand over to Amy Ross, who's Senior Advisor, Impact Accelerator at Charity Aid Foundation. Welcome, Amy.
Hi everyone, and thanks Lisa. It's really exciting to be here. I hope that you've had a really great day. I managed to join some of the sessions earlier and it seemed like really exciting and relevant content. So I hope you've all got the best out of this conference that's been put on for you. So the session now is about how to write a fundraising bid, and sadly I can't see you. I don't know who you are. I don't know what kind of organizations you work at and where you might sit in those organizations, but I think it's safe to say that fundraising and finances is pretty high on the agenda of most charities and social purpose organizations at the moment for a whole host of reasons, not least the fact that funding is really tight and it's super competitive out there at the moment to access the funding that organisations need. So making sure that you've got a reasonable grasp of what a good fundraising application looks like, what kind of things that it could include, what to look out for is, I'd say, hopefully relevant to lots of people in this session. I'm going to do some quick introductions about me and the organisation that I work for. I'm going to spend most of the session talking about those kind of core basics of a fundraising bid. What are the key things that you want to be focusing on that are going to really sell your organisation and give you the best chance of success in your application? I think, you know, it would be remiss of me in a digital fundraising, in a digital conference, not to talk about AI and the role that it is increasingly playing and can play in fundraising, but also some of the considerations that I think it's important to take into account when thinking about using AI in our fundraising. And finally, some space for Q&A. So hopefully that looks like a useful way to spend the next 30 to 40 minutes or so. If this is completely not in your neck of the woods, this is your chance to leave, but hopefully you stay and get something out of our time together. So just in terms of CAF, I mean, most people know CAF or the Charities Aid Foundation for its bank. That certainly before I started working at CAF, that was the interaction that I'd have with CAF. I used to be a fundraiser. I also used to manage the finances at a small grassroots migrant organisation. So I'd be doing our accounts and I'd see Charities Aid Foundation coming in. What I didn't know is that CAF has many more strings to its bow, including a really amazing team called the Impact Accelerator that I sit in, which is where CAF goes beyond you know, kind of banking and providing kind of financial services effectively to a range of charities and individuals and corporate organizations, and really tries to kind of literally accelerate impact through the charity sector. And we do that in 3 ways. So we have an advisory team that I sit in that provides advisory services to charities, but also funders, corporate organizations and private philanthropists. So we advise around best practice, we provide fundraising support, we look at impact measurement and theories of change, developing strategies, we do research, so a whole host of things to really kind of help organizations with their social purpose missions. We also have a grant making body, so CAF is a grant maker. In some cases, we give out our own funds, so we run our own funding programs. And in some cases, we grant out the funds of other either organizations. So we grant funds for various corporate foundations, and also we grant out money on behalf of individuals. So where there are philanthropists that want to run grant making programs, we do that on their behalf. And we also have a social investment wing. So for those organizations that, alongside kind of grant income, also generate trading income through their activities, we have a program that can support them with repayable finance. So they're the three things that sit within the Impact Accelerator. I'm in the advisory team. My background is very much in the charity sector. I've worked in the charity sector for 15, let's say around 15 years. A lot of fundraising, a lot of financial management, impact evaluation and monitoring evaluation, program management, governance, strategy. So a little bit of everything. So my role at CAF is really about bringing all of those things together, and using all of that experience to the best of my ability to support the organisations and individuals that we work with. So I'm drawing on my fundraising experience here. I've fundraised at a range of different organisations. Most recently, a kind of yeah, as I said, a small frontline migrant organisation. So really, on the coal face of making ends meet and trying to make sure that there's money in the door to support the work that we were doing. So I am well versed in the struggles and the challenges of fundraising, and hopefully have some relevant insights to share. So going into the basics of your fundraising application, it's a really obvious point to make, but I think it has to be made. The funding landscape is really, really, really competitive, and I know it's really tempting to just kind of have a go, because we feel that even if there's a tiny chance of getting that money, then it's worth it to just to kind of like throw your hat in the ring. But because it's so competitive, the volume of applications that funders are receiving at the moment is so incredibly high. They're really looking at filtering out any organisation that doesn't meet their eligibility criteria. So when you're looking at things like the size of the income of your organisation, your annual turnover, the length of time that you've been operating for, program specific eligibility around the type of outcomes that funders are looking for, the type of organizations that they want to support. It's a horrible thing to say, but if you're just outside that eligibility criteria, they're not going to put organizations through that. The best organization in the world is going to go on the no pile. So honestly, brutal as it sounds, save yourself the time. Don't waste your precious, precious resources making applications and applying to organisations that you're not a good fit for, and save them for those organisations and those opportunities where you are. I learnt this phrase the other day, so I'm glad to get an opportunity to use it. Coercive isomorphism is the fancy word for something that we used to call being funder-led. So this is where really funders kind of dictate the direction of the charity sector. So the example that's given is if all the funders got together and decided that they really wanted to fund party hats for donkeys, you'd see charities providing party hats for donkeys, picking up all over the place to access that funding. In the real world, in a more practical example, it's where charities kind of flex what they do, compromise on their core activities just to get that money in the door. Again, as tempting as it might seem to kind of mold yourself to the funding opportunity that's being offered, it's not good for your charity long term. It can get you into some hot water in terms of measuring outcomes. It will drain your resources to go and do something that isn't core to your mission. So really avoid being funder led. I'd really recommend being incredibly true to the work that you set out to do, the social purpose that you were set out to deliver, and stay very strong to that. And funders will recognise when you're doing that work and when your application sits squarely in your wheelhouse, and they'll recognise when you're trying to fit something, you're trying to squeeze something into a square peg into a round hole, and they won't go for it. So again, save your energy, save your precious resources for those opportunities that are a really good match for your organisation. Another one is really obvious, but your policies, particularly safeguarding. I liaise with my grant making colleagues here and said, what are some of the big no-nos that applicants make? And they just said, we're looking at safeguarding policies that were last updated in 2015. So whatever you're sending, your safeguarding policy, it might be your equality, diversity and inclusion policy, it might be your reserves policy. Just make sure that those things are really up to date, that there's evidence that your trustees have looked at that policy recently, and you're not sending something that's wildly outdated. It's a small point, but again, those things in a really competitive landscape, funders are, brutal as it sounds, looking for any reason to put something on the no pile instead of the yes pile, because it's going to shorten their shortlist. So don't give them those reasons. Don't let a good application down by sending a policy that's out of date. So the next one is a case for support. So this is your reason for being. This is your elevator pitch. This is your really concise and coherent way that you explain to any funder why they should fund you. And the basic things that this includes is, what's the problem that you're trying to address? And what's interesting working with lots of small charities particularly is that they really understand what it is they do. They understand who they support and they understand what they're trying to do, but they struggle to kind of think systemically about the kind of the problem that they're trying to address beyond this person's day-to-day crisis, or delivering this service. What's the societal wide problem that you're trying to address? And I'll give you the example of an organization that I worked with recently that supports men and women who are in and out of the criminal justice system, and they identified their problem as men and women don't have support. They don't know have anywhere else to go. They're getting into kind of cycles of crime and addiction and various other kind of lifestyle crises. And we pushed them to think beyond that, and it was kind of beyond their previous thinking to look at the wider system, like what's happening that means that these men and women are ending up at their door. And we talked about the problems in the criminal justice system. We talked about underfunding of prisons. We talked about really overstretched and under-resourced probation services that mean that these men and women are falling through the gap. They're not getting the support that they need, and they're ending up at the door of this particular organization. And so I really invite you to throw your net quite wide, thinking about what are the systemic underlying society-wide problems that your organization is trying to address. And you might just be addressing one of the symptoms of that problem. You're not necessarily addressing the whole thing, but really show that you understand how your organization fits within a really wide kind of societal situation. Then what's your solution and how will you meet this need? I think often that's the easiest one for organizations to articulate. What is it that you do when you turn up at work every day? What's the solution that you're providing to this problem that you've identified? Another way of looking at this is, how will you meet the need of the people or the situation that you've identified as experiencing some kind of crisis or a problem? The next really important one in your case for support is, what evidence do you have that this is an effective solution? And that's not just the evidence that you have that this is a problem. So it's not just, here's all the evidence to say that, services in this particular area are in crisis, or people in this particular situation are in crisis. What evidence do you have that your solution is an effective one? So what data are you collecting to show that the people that are arriving at your door, or the situation that you're addressing, is being, if not solved, then at least supported and improved through the work that you're doing? And then finally, why do you need funding now? What's happening right at this moment? What's your case for support now rather than in 6 months' time? It might be that some other funding is coming to an end. It might be that you want to scale up your activities. It might be that you want to reach twice as many people next year. It might be that there's a big policy change coming down the line and you know that demand is going to massively increase for your services. So why do you need funding now? So your case for support is, what's the problem? What's your solution? How do you know this is an effective solution? And why do you need funding now? The things that sit beneath this that are really valuable, and if you don't have them, I'd really invite you to think about this as an organization, is having a clear vision of the change that you want to see in the world, a clear mission. What's your organization's place in delivering this vision? Your values, what do you believe? What principles and values do you hold strong in your organization and that kind of guide your work? And a theory of change is really a way of articulating, why do we think that a certain thing will happen if we do a certain thing? So a theory of change, you can see some really complicated ones that are, big and visual and have lots of boxes all over the place. It can also just be a couple of sentences where simply says, we believe that if we do X, Y, and Z, the following things will happen, and that will end in a change for the people that we support. So it doesn't have to be really a complicated exercise, but it's a really good little succinct way of articulating what you're trying to do and why you think it will work. The nitty-gritty of your project plan needs to include some really cool things. So what are you trying to achieve? Another way of saying that is, what impact do you want to have? What do you want to happen as a result of you doing this project, or you existing as an organization? What do you want to change in the world? How will you achieve it? Again, that's the easy stuff. That's what you do on a daily basis. That's, hiring a new staff member, or opening up a new session, or delivering things in a slightly different way. What will you do to achieve the impact that you want to have? How will you know that this will be effective? Again, this comes back to the evidence and measurement. You need to have at least, it doesn't have to be set in stone, but a vague idea of what will change look like in 6 months' time, or a year's time, or 5 years' time, to know that this plan is effective. What do you expect to see is different, and how will you measure that so that you can have some understanding of whether it's worked or not? You need to have a really good understanding of what resources you'll need, and that's also looking at what is your current capacity. So maybe your capacity is really low at the moment and the resources you need are people, or maybe the resources that you need is volunteers rather than staff, or maybe the resources that you need is a new building. So really understanding what is your capacity and what resources will you need to deliver this. What are the risks? What might go wrong? That's just basic due diligence and contingency planning, really. So if you know that your work is dependent on lots of external factors, how are you factoring in the risks that some of those things don't go to plan, and what will you do to respond to that? And then how will you learn and share that learning? So going back to the measurement and the evidence, how will you learn about what you do? And that's also about being reflective. So how will you capture your staff and volunteers' observations and that really important qualitative data? And then how will you make sure that other people get to benefit and learn from that? Do you have other organizations in your network that you can update at various points? Or is it about, do you have a newsletter, or using your social media? And thinking creatively about all the ways that you interact with the outside world and how you can share your learning with them so that others can benefit. Language and voice. I'm a really big proponent of that. Of this. I think funders really want to hear you and your organization, and every organization is different, and every organization has its own personality, its own characteristics. And on the receiving end of an application, I want to hear that coming through. So I want to hear words and language that really articulate your values and principles. Don't I think it's tempting to kind of go into thesaurus mode, and we think that we need to kind of chuck every single word that we know and use very formal language. But actually, I think it's much more important that you have a voice as an organization, and that links back to your values, links back to your principles, your mission, and your vision. Making sure that your application has a clear voice, which is consistent throughout, is really important. You have to remember there's a person at the other end of this who's reading this, and they need to be able to follow the structure and the logic of your application. It's really important, especially if you're using AI to help you write your application, because obviously an AI voice is not your voice, or if several people contribute, which is completely natural and normal to bring in other people from across the organization to contribute to a fundraising application. But it's really important that when you look at it in the round, that it's consistent, that there's similar words are used throughout, that you're not kind of contradicting yourself from one section to another, that there's not repetition. So, if lots of people contribute, including AI, then just make sure that someone gives it a good read through to make sure that the language is clear. Again, going back to that point about, this isn't a competition to see who can use the longest and the biggest and the most amount of words in a funding application. So using language that's clear and simple and avoiding jargon is really important. And I think it's also important to think about who your reader is, who the audience is, who's receiving this application. And that's different if you're applying to a big corporate foundation versus if you're applying to a small family trust. But in most cases, it will be an individual. So I think thinking about speaking to an individual rather than speaking to an organization. This isn't about writing academic journals. This is about triggering an emotional response in an individual, and you want that individual reading your application to think, yeah, I get this. I understand why this is important. I understand why they're doing what they're doing. I can see that it works. I am compelled to respond to this case for support, this call to action. So do think about, the individual that is picking up this application by email or on paper form, and how they're going to respond emotionally. I think that's a good way to kind of really target your writing towards a human rather than a kind of an inanimate body. So AI. Yes, we're here today talking about kind of charity digital, and obviously AI is also playing a part in fundraising. I've listed this as pros and consider rather than pros and cons, because I'm going to put my neck on the line and say that as long as you manage and kind of mitigate some of the risks well, there aren't really any cons here. The opportunity for particularly small organizations without a lot of fundraising capacity to add that to that fundraising capacity and save themselves time is phenomenal, by using AI. I'm not a tech wizard. I'm not a digital wizard, but I'm becoming more confident in kind of popping a question into ChatGPT, for example, and seeing what it comes up with. And 9 times out of 10, it's a really good starter for 10. This should never be what you send off to, your biggest funding opportunity. You should never just kind of copy and paste what comes out of an AI tool and send it straight off. But as a way to get started, to just do some of the legwork and give you a really good first draft, I think, it's almost now to the point where if you're not doing it, then you're really missing an opportunity and you need to get on board. As I said, especially for small organizations, it's such a great tool. Again, make sure that you check for tone, check for consistency, check for language, check for voice. It's even more important if you're using AI that you kind of then rebrand it within the voice and the tone and the language of your organization, because otherwise it is going to sound very generic. It's going to sound like it's been generated by AI. I think we know when we can spot it. So it's a good idea once it's done the legwork for you to give it a once over and just make sure that it sounds like you. It sounds like the kind of thing that your organization would write. So the considers, when using AI, it's really key that you think about what you're committing to. So if you are successful, you'll need to be able to deliver on what you promised. So don't let AI lead you into overpromising. And I say that because AI will come up with loads of really, really good ideas, things that you haven't thought about before. That's fine if you are writing a policy, for example. So if you ask AI to write your reserves policy, or if you ask AI to write a recruitment policy, then all that data and all that information that it's harvesting from the internet is really great for making you think of things and offering ideas that you won't otherwise have thought of. If you're writing a funding application, that application really needs to sit within the parameters that you can deliver to. So it's no good asking AI to write a funding application. It comes up with 10 more ideas that you haven't thought of, and you think that actually makes it sound better. I'm going to use that. Because if you don't have the capacity, if you don't have the resources, if you're not set up to come good on that project plan, it's not going to work out well. The other thing to think about is that on the one hand, AI is making fundraising much easier. On the other hand, by that very nature, it is increasing competition for grants, because more people and organizations are able to fill out the application form. It's taking less time, so fewer people are running out of time and everyone's kind of getting around to doing it. So AI is democratizing things on the one hand, and then making things more competitive and difficult to access funding on the other hand, because there are just more organizations going for it. So the flip side of this, the flip side of charities starting to use AI for funding applications, is that funders themselves may start to use AI to screen for eligible applications. So funders have limited resources. There's only so many grant makers that you can employ. If you see a 200% spike in the applications that you receive, it would be remiss of funders to not make use of the same technology to help filter out, do that initial screening check. In that context, it's even more important to make sure that your eligibility is absolutely crucial. If you on a wing on a prayer of submitted an application using AI or not using AI, that is only partly eligible. If you're coming up against an AI screening tool that the funder has implemented, then you're 100% not going to get through there, because that one person who might have snuck you through isn't going to see your application, because AI is going to screen you out in the first instance. It's really important to check for language. And in this case, I'm talking about the language that funders use. So as much as, we shouldn't be funder-led, it's really important when you're thinking about language to look at the website of your funder, of your potential funder, look at the way that they're talking about impact, look at the way they talk about the kind of work that you're doing, and use language, because especially when coming up against an AI screening tool, that's just going to tick those boxes and give your application a higher chance of making it through. So yeah, I'm going to put my neck on the line here and say that if you're not already using AI to help write your funding applications, then you definitely should. Use AI also to kind of understand exactly the kind of application that you're trying to write. So feed it all those bits of information about what kind of organization you are, exactly what you're looking for, exactly, kind of give it words and language that you use so that it can be more intelligent in the options that it gives back to you. And kind of train your AI to be your fundraiser, I guess, is what we're all hoping to achieve ultimately. And I think it can be a really valuable tool. That's everything that I had, and I've made some time for questions at the end if you have any. I've got some resources here which are my email address if anyone wants to get in touch. A link to our support pages, and then also a link to the Venturesome Impact Fund. So for those organisations that do have a trading income and are looking at different ways to secure investment, then that might be worth a look. And we have programmes open at the moment, and funding from small pots up to larger pots and over a long period of time. So do have a look if that applies to you.
Brilliant. Let me see. Not sure, am I live?
Yeah, I can hear you,
Yes,
Lisa.
super. Brilliant. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Amy, for this very interesting presentation. And thank you very much for sharing your links as well. We'll make sure that they are also available to all our attendees later on, because especially the Venturesome Impact Fund seems a very interesting fund, and I think it is open to registered charities as well as non-profit organizations. So you don't need to be a registered charity for that one. Is it correct?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Super. But brilliant. Well, we have plenty of questions and a nice chunk of time to go through as many as we can. So please do carry on sending your questions for Amy to answer, and I'll dive straight in. What is the best way to find sources of fundings and grants, perhaps new ones that come up?
Yeah, really good question. Something that I've found really useful is tapping into your local network. So some local authorities, or there are some kind of local community foundations that will pull that information for you, because it's a huge amount of legwork as individual fundraisers to be kind of out scouring the internet and trying to research funding opportunities off your own back. So I think there are more and more kind of instances where there's kind of local newsletters or kind of funding boards. So it's worth looking into those and seeing if there's anything in your local authority or in your county perhaps where someone's doing that legwork for you. There's a really interesting site called I think it's called Charity Excellence. Maybe I
Yes, I
can
was
look it
going to
up.
mention
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And they, bless those people that do this stuff, because I just think, the world is better for them. But the Charity Excellence site has recently updated their search tool to add some things like kind of less popular causes, to go into to kind of like filter down into more kind of granular detail on the kind of work that organizations might be doing. Um, and they're, updating funding programs and giving you up-to-date information on which ones are paused for strategic review, and what they've previously funded. So there are some amazing people and organizations out there that are doing this work, and kind of providing that freely. So I'd say before you start doing that research yourself, just check and see who around you, either at a local or regional level, or something like Charity Excellence, which is nationwide, is already doing that work, and tap into those resources, because there are some really wonderful people out there doing that
Absolutely.
research.
Yeah. And I second that. We are partner with Charity Excellence Framework, and they have a great directory, so you
Mm,
can check them out. But yeah, thank you for that, Amy. Moving on to questions from Kevin, who is a CAF customer.
mhm.
So they use CAF online for online donations, and they're wondering how they can access the broader array of CAF products such as advisory and grant making.
Okay. So if you go on our website, we've recently updated our website. I have to say it's now much better than it was about 3 months ago. And hopefully it's much clearer for charities to follow through and find information about the broader support that we offer to charities. So if you go to CAF Online, our three audiences are charities, kind of private individuals who are, kind of philanthropists, or kind of your regular givers, and also corporates. But if you go onto the charity pages, there'll be lots of information there about what kind of support we provide, and our grant making programs, and also the Venturesome Impact Fund. So have a look online. It's great that you're already a customer, but yeah, you won't necessarily know, sadly, all the other stuff that sits behind the donate tool.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you very much, Emmy. Um, and an interesting question from Fraser, actually, who is saying, a bit like modern recruitment screening, do we now need to write AI-friendly applications that are keyword optimized so that they can ensure they aren't screened out? And yeah, quite interested to hear your take on this, because obviously there's a lot of talk about perhaps some applications being rejected because they have been created with AI. So yeah, interesting to hear your take.
Yeah, we discussed this recently. And CAF as a funder, and I hope that other funders will take the same approach, is that we won't, we would never discard an application that looked like it had been written by AI, because we recognize that it's a really important tool for charities. And I think we should be encouraging
Interesting.
people to use it rather than not. So I think, we've taken the
Interesting.
position that we would never say, oh, a robot's written that, that's not for us. We are still looking for that AI generated application to have a really strong case for support, to be really evidence based. So tick all of those boxes that I mentioned before, and obviously be eligible. But we shouldn't be penalising organisations for making use of absolutely every tool available to them to access the funds that they desperately need. I think the great thing about AI in the fundraising space is that it's going to democratize organizations' ability to access funds, and kind of move away from the gatekeepers, the big organizations with the great fundraisers, the contacts, the track record, and those sorts of things, and make it a bit more accessible for smaller organizations that have really struggled in the past to be competitive. They've now got this great tool. They can write, as good an application as anyone, with a bit of, but I think it's like, collaborate with your AI. Like,
Mm.
don't just kind of, like, delegate the whole thing to your AI and then wash your hands of it. You do need to do that oversight and kind of make sure that it's on point. um I don't know about, yeah, kind of keyword optimizing. I think the keyword optimizing is do all of the research and the spend time understanding the donor, understanding the funder, what they're looking for, and then make sure that that your application is keyword optimized to those things, and that it's the right words and phrases and language is embedded in your application. But yeah, I would hope that funders more broadly are recognizing that this is a really important tool for charities, and not penalizing people for using it.
Absolutely. Thank you for your advice and your take, Amy here. Um, so question from Christine around AI again. What types of prompts do you use to get AI to write your bid or to help you write your bids?
Mm. So I think I would just
Tricky
start with
one.
something really broad, kind of
Mm,
can you write maybe start with your case for support. Can you write a case for support for, a small organization supporting kind of children under 5 access music, for example? um and then kind of go into it. So then it's like, this is in Nottingham, or this is for children with learning disabilities, or this is for children whose parents aren't working, and just kind of get down into the
write the
nitty
prompt.
gritty, and kind of like target it, and make it more and more specialized. um you can also put in some tools. I know I'm not on the BBC. I feel like I have to kind of, other tools are available, but on ChatGPT, for example, you can set, I think they're called, you can give it tools. On mine it's like, I always want to use English language spellings. I want kind of UK examples when I'm researching
Oh
things.
yes,
So
yes.
you can give it those kind of top line prompts. So you can say, I want my research, I want, if you're researching evidence, for example, I want this to be from the Northeast, or I want this to be kind of organizations with an income under £1 million, or on those sorts of things. So yeah, I think prompt and feed it, and almost kind of treat it as something that you can mold around your organization. So I think maybe start with something broad, and then go
Refine
into more detail.
and refine. Yes, very, very good point. Thank you. And moving on to what is the next one? Oh yeah. Do you have a good resource to learn more about theory of change and how to implement it in a charity?
Good question. Um, I I don't know if there's a I don't know if there's a kind of there must be. I would look at things like Akivo and the Association of
Mm.
Charitable Foundations, NCVO. So I would look at those kind of
Yeah.
sector-wide body websites, and see if they have tools and resources. I think another thing to do is just kind of put it into a web browser, and bring up some images and see which ones speak to you. Sometimes I think that's just really good. If you think about how you want to lay out your work, if you might want to do it in a pyramid, you might want to do it in a circle, you might want to do it kind of in a linear way, and maybe have a kind of visual framework. I think what your theory of change should kind of lay out is what you do, and then kind of the different steps of change
Hmm.
that you would expect to see, and then end with a big kind of impact goal that you're working towards. It should kind of lay out that roadmap between you and the change that you're trying
Yes.
to see. So however you want to present that, I think maybe there might be some kind of guidance on those websites, but I think also just thinking about how you want it to look at the end product, and then kind of
Yep.
populating that is another way to go about it.
Yeah, certainly. We, as Charity Digital, also have a theory of change which is available on our website. So you please feel
Great,
free to check it out and perhaps get some inspiration from it. It's in the About Us section.
great.
So yeah, thank you. Moving on because we have time for maybe one more. Well, the other side of AI, basically. So we talk a lot about AI in writing applications, but Florence is wondering whether funders are using AI to make decisions about who gets funding, to analyze application, or approach charities that match with the criteria. Um,
Mm.
do you mind sharing perhaps your opinion about that, or
Yeah,
your
yeah.
thoughts?
So CAF isn't doing it yet, but I think it is
Oh,
something that we've discussed, because we've seen
okay.
this huge increase
In
in applications. So I
applications.
think so I don't have the inside track on every funder, but I imagine most funders will be thinking about how to use new technology to
Mm.
help manage this huge surge in applications. I don't think
Indeed.
I'd hope that no one was using it to make decisions, but it
Yeah,
might be that they're
agree.
using it to kind of filter things and possibly on the research side as well. If organizations are doing kind of proactive research to identify organizations, then I think it's another research tool, as is, kind of Google and other search engines. So yeah, I think inevitably we will see it used more and more on both sides, but I hopefully would never be the thing that is making the decision. I'd like to think that's always, a panel of people with some
Mm,
lived experience and some
yeah.
expertise and, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, as we say, applying human oversight ultimately, and using AI as a basis,
Hmm.
as a way to perhaps sort, applications from a at a first point, but then continuing, manual or human applied oversight and
Exactly.
review. Definitely. Well, this is all we've got time for today. But thank you very much again, Amy,
You're
for your
welcome.
time and for sharing your insights and expertise around writing a fundraising bid. All, like I said, all the links that you shared here will ensure that because we're sharing the slides afterwards, they'll
Great.
be available to all our audience. So thank you very much once
Thank
again,
you.
and yeah, have a great rest of the day.
Take care. Bye bye.